The Forbidden Tale, a comprehensive study on lesbian, gay, bisexuals, LGB in Iran. Chapter 4 1.9 Counseling Services and Additional Aids. As explained in more detail in preceding chapters, visiting a doctor or a psychologist is undertaken for a myriad of intentions and purposes. One radical difference is that when one visits a medical doctor, it is to seek medical treatment, medical relief about abnormal physical symptoms that hopefully can be resolved by medical interventions ranging from prescription drugs to surgical procedures. When one visits a psychologist, it is usually for mental trauma. When an LGB individual visits a psychologist to discuss with respect to their sexual orientation, they usually are not seeking treatment or change, but are seeking reconciliation in an attempt to face their sexuality. As perceptions of the causes of homosexuality reflected the fear of society, the treatment reflects the appropriate punishments for their assumed transgressions. LGBT individuals suffer because they were taught to suffer. First by their society at large, and then by the scientific community, which declared that homosexuality was a medical illness. Underlying these attempts by psychiatry and psychology to change sexual orientation is a basic philosophical belief, an assumption that human behavior and sexual orientation are potentially malleable. Many psychologists have responded with negative solutions. For example, psychologists recommend having sexual relationships with the opposite sex with the purpose of changing the sexual orientation of the individual. These solutions eventually pushed participants to be involved in complicated relationships, triggering sexual agitation and sorrow, and contributes to the feeling of losing one's identity. Despite the general consensus that homosexuality is not a mental disease, there are expert psychologists in Iran who consider homosexuality as an illness and try to categorize the person within a defined sexual role framework. Patience has resulted in psychologists introducing the LGB participants to each other in consecutive uninterrupted periods. Although this may have a possible short-lived positive output, the technique triggers an inevitable maleffect. Each of these psychologists reacts to the individuals and their families separately using different approaches. These approaches inevitably cause the LGBT individuals stop the counseling sessions as the visits seem useless and do not help ameliorate feelings and status. The survey findings from the LGBT individuals in Mashhad and Isfahan demonstrate how LGB individuals feel about psychological treatment. Sexual minorities have a distrust and negative attitudes towards the role of psychologists or counselors. The constant state of wariness and caution that accompanies and clings to LGBT individuals all their life spills over even in the presence of a social worker or psychoanalyst. Distrust prevents the person from letting one's guards down to reveal his problems and disables him from receiving support and useful advice and recommendations. A 28-year-old male respondent from Mashhad shared the following. I haven't gone to psychology sessions, like sexual treatment ones. Totally, psychology is not interesting and I do not believe in it that much. I don't really believe. Counseling is just getting money. One time is not enough. There are people who are aggressive, who quarrel. I hold counseling classes for them 2 or 3 times a week. I spend 1.5 hours with them. In 1.5 hours, they change suddenly. He was aggressive, he becomes calm. Psychology is not interesting. I don't believe in it. A 24-year-old from Isfahan shared, My mother gave me this suggestion too. In my point of view, I became really angry and upset. I said, I am not sick and I do not have mental problems to visit a psychologist or psychotherapist. This is for the reason that normally a person with mental problems is taken to a psychologist or psychotherapist. They take him there if there's vulnerability. Therefore, asking me to visit a psychologist or psychotherapist can be the biggest insult. What does she mean? It means that we don't accept you and we can't cope with you and believe that you have a mental problem and disorderliness, thus we want to take you to a doctor. This is the biggest mistake. If you are willing to do so, again, it is a personal attitude. You should choose if you want to accept it or not. Another insightful issue is the gender dichotomy aspect sexuality of the visits. This research study revealed that amongst the male participants, seeking a professional help is deemed as a sign of weakness. Men are less willing to exhibit their weakness. On the other hand, female participants were more willing to receive help and receive advice. Given the fact that psychology is something new in the public culture, visiting a psychologist is still stigmatizing. The patient prefers not to be seen while entering a counseling office as he does not want to be considered as a person who is incapable of solving his or her problems. Providing some clarification over the atmosphere of psychology and the culture of visiting counselor in Iran seems useful here. In recent decades, the science of psychology has become familiar to the public as there are now accessible centers considered as places to visit in case an individual is facing emotional, mental, personal and/or family problems. Currently in Iran, there are two sources of license issuing in the psychology field as a scientific profession in Iran. 1. IR of Iran Medical Council, and 2. State Welfare Organization of Iran. Considering these two extensions in the field of counseling as a profession, we learned there were two different types of professionals: psychologists and counselors who work for the government, and those who have their own private practice. Psychologists in the first category have limited knowledge and information on sexual orientation issues within their working community, and consequently, their authority and control over implementing their thoughts are limited. Some groups of people choose state psychologists when they are unable to afford the private counselor. These people are introduced to psychologists from the state welfare organization as patients in order to take advantage of the free counseling sessions. In these sessions, experts have limited strategies and solutions for treating their homosexual patients. These psychologists, by extension, are government employees. When the homosexuality is conspicuously absent in Iran's laws, save for doling out punishments and clearly not acceptance, counseling with the state psychologist is not fathomable. Indeed, a psychologist who even suggests acceptance of one's sexual orientation as a natural occurrence in the sexuality spectrum is in essence taking a stance against the principles defined by his or her employer, the government. This may even lead to annulment of the psychologist's license. The second group of people are usually from affluent families who have the financial means to visit private psychologists who have their own practice in city centers and not affiliated with governmental organizations. These psychologists have a relatively higher understanding of sexual identity issues, perhaps less concerned with etiology and focus on a cure for homosexuality, and thus can act more authoritatively in giving counseling. (1.10) Violence and mental health of homosexuals. A study comparing methods of dependency amongst heterosexuals and LGBTs indicates that with respect to stress levels, there's a significant difference between affection styles of homosexuals and heterosexuals. In the Western culture, males pat each other's back or hug each other as their only socially acceptable show of mutual affection. In contrast, many LGB dare not show their public affection in Iran. Hiding and fear of being identified do not end with adolescence. For example, studies on the workplace experience of LGB people found that fear of discrimination and concealment of sexual orientation are prevalent and that they have adverse psychological, health and job-related outcomes. These studies show that LGB people engage in identity disclosure and concealment strategies that address fear of discrimination on one hand and the need for self-integrity on the other. The study revealed that people who are less accepting of their sexual orientation have a comparatively higher level of stress. The results of the research study indicate that there is a direct relationship between the negative attitudes of society and people's stress level. The constant need to mask one's true identity, coupled with LGBT's stigmatization by their culture, can contribute to acute mental health issues. Living within Iran's rigid system and obviously coping with societal stigma and abject disapproval of a traditional society is arduous. Rates of mental health conditions are particularly high in bisexual individuals and those who fear or choose not to reveal their sexual orientation or gender identity. But those who do not identify as a part of that community are often left to struggle against discrimination alone, an experience that is frequently isolating and damaging to one's mental and emotional well-being. Though not all LGBT people will face mental health challenges, discrimination or violence, many people report mental well-being and satisfaction. An 18-year-old lesbian from Mashhad. I think at the end of the day, every woman needs to rely on a man. Even in the relationships of lesbians, the one who plays the role of a stronger partner still needs someone stronger than herself to rely on to survive. Lesbians. The actual rates of depression and anxiety among lesbians is not clear, with data varying widely amongst differently designed studies, but the literature taken as a whole suggests that lesbians have higher rates of mental health problems. Population-based studies provide the best data. A national probability survey in the US showed a higher rate of anxiety disorders among lesbians compared to heterosexual women. Conversely, another study in the Netherlands showed higher rates of depression, but not anxiety, amongst lesbians compared to heterosexual women. Additionally, the same study also found that lesbians have a twofold rate of at least 2 lifetime mental health diagnoses. The risk of depression and other mental health problems, including the risk of suicidal ideation, appears to be increased amongst lesbians who are not out and those who have experienced bullying and discrimination. Lastly, the culmination of chronic problems that most of the sexual minorities experience on a daily basis, the ridicules at home, school and workplace and even the streets, the extreme peril of being caught, the forced exploitations, bullying and sexual harassments lead to an intolerable, unfair and inhumane living conditions. Many live under social and state repression. When such conditions remain fixed, it further paves the way for social harms such as HIV, violence, mental disorders, depression and suicide to flourish. In many cases, the individual sees no alleviation of this chronic social rejection ambience and often resorts to suicide attempts. Most of the participants recounted stories of their failed suicide attempts. Abed 2006 reported that out of 30 gays, 20 had attempted suicide at one point in their lives. Previous studies suggest attempts were significantly associated with psychological stresses, including gender nonconformity, early awareness of being gay, and victimization. The most common suicidal modes were ingestion of pills, suffocation by gas, or slitting wrist. Many showed the research team their visible scars from failed suicide attempts. Even though some of the scars had faded away, they were still deeply present internally in their minds and hearts with no relief. The violent and insulting reactions that are played out on streets and public places areas are also played out in their community, where their sexuality is judged and viewed with disdain and derision. It is also played out at the workplace, where they spend a significant part of the day. This is not uniquely confined to Iran. In general, globally LGBT continue to face widespread discrimination in the workplace. And again, Iran proves not to be an exception. The barriers to healthcare faced by LGBT individuals, coupled with violence and mental health issues experienced by this population due to homophobia, can also cut short the number of years LGBT people are able to work. The interviewees reported countless stories of insults, rapes, humiliations, and contempt at their workplace that creates a real and immediate threat to their economic and mental security and adding another layer of dead-end dismay in the LGBT world. In addition to the abysmal behavior of co-workers, needless to say, career promotions and advancements are unlikely for those sexual minorities who are unsuccessful as masking their true identity and pretending at workplace. Not being able to pretend or just wary in feigning society-approved sexual orientation decreases the chance of sexual minorities from having professional positions. Managers who make employment decisions are normally not willing to employ sexual minorities. Revealing one's sexual tendency runs the risk of thwarting job opportunities and producing adverse job outcomes, such as receiving a negative performance evaluation, being passed over for a promotion, or labeled incompetence. Securing a governmental or political position is virtually impossible and realistically less likely to occur. Domestic abuse or violence by an intimate partner is usually discussed in the context of heterosexual relationships. But the incidence of domestic abuse in heterosexual relationships is also prevalent in homosexual relationships as well. In heterosexual relationships, there are some legal options for protection such as restraining or protective orders and arrests. Typical framing of partner abuse in heterosexual relationship issue primarily focuses on men physically or verbally abusing women and poignantly ignores victims in abusive homosexual relationships. As the lives for many have always been a cascading combination of tolerance, suppression, and social and family adversities, they are much more vulnerable to experiencing violent sexual relationships. Sexual minorities do not fit the traditional stereotype of a domestic violence victim. Homosexuals, and particularly the ones with the feminine role, potentially and mentally accept violence. In an abusive LGB relationship, the primary concern of exposing the homosexual relationship may thwart exposing the abuse. Many are disinclined to report attacks to avoid the publicity. Many survivors feel shame and stigma. In Iran, sexual minorities cannot take advantage of their constitutional and civic rights in Iran and cannot defend themselves when involved in an unhealthy violent relationship. In fact, LGBT are comprehensively and systematically denied any legal protection. As the laws in Iran already view their relationship as blatant contravention of religion norms and legal violations, sexual minorities, already terrified of disclosure, do not have a comfortable relationship with the legal system, police, and all law enforcement. Multiple factors have been shown to contribute to abusive homosexual relationships, including, but not limited to, childhood abuse and cultural norms. Sometimes the lingering stress of abusive childhood incidents can lead to an ongoing shame in adulthood, which plausibly can further contribute to stress in a gay relationship. Sexual attacks and rapes are frequent in these cases, and individuals often experience these sexual aggressions in their later relationships. As previously mentioned, relationships are short-term and superficial, and this obstructs individuals, particularly the individuals who assume the masculine role from having a healthy emotional investment with the other partner. Amongst the numerous testimonies gathered by our research team was that of a very soft-spoken, humble 25-year-old gay individual in Isfahan. He shared a deplorable, chilling encounter he experienced. Verbal violence or verbal bullying is the more common aggression seen against homosexuals. LGBT incidents of verbal violence can be from strangers, but also people familiar to the individual. The verbal abuse starts early from the family and partners, to humiliating name-calling from peer groups, and to verbal harassment and humiliation at the workplace. Those targeted by such violence are perceived to violate heteronormative rules and contravene perceived protocols of gender and sexual roles. In some worst-case scenarios, participants reported sexual assaults and threats of being physically attacked, raped, and compulsory sex. Violence targeted at people because of their perceived sexuality can often be played out in violent sexual games. It is difficult to determine what motivates the violence. Sorting out their own identities and attacking the very people who make them the most uncomfortable about their own sexuality Men with a weak sense of individual identity attacks on LGBT to encounter their own sense of low status or a sadistic orientation. Given the intensity of the violence in these sexual relationships, it is not unrealistic to venture that heterosexuals might be suppressing latent homosexual feelings or mental sexual illnesses, transferring it into younger homosexuals. Pederasty and pedophilia. Heterosexuality, cloaked with the tradition of strong masculine bonds that are a hallmark of Islamic culture, are at odds with pederasty. Pederasty refers to sexual relations between middle-aged men with young boys, referred to as bachebaz in Iran, commonly accompanied by violence, harassment, and deceit. Probing the profound intricacies on relationships between middle-aged men and young boys leads to a more different and more comprehensive discourse. This unrealistic sexual relationship is riddled with child abuse, sexual exploitation, and rape issues. Even when the young boy as the feminine partner forms an attachment to the older person and is aware of the relationship, he still has no freedom and choice. By the older person imposing his intentions on his victim, he does not teach but leads the young boy in the direction he wishes. The affair is sarcastically called a long-term project by the man. This long-term project expresses the way sexual relations are formed between male homosexuals with younger boys. According to the participants, these pederast individuals usually have separate houses and domiciles for their sexual relations that takes place outside their family network. Industrial workplaces, company warehouses, factories, restaurants, cafes, a second house or in their office apartment, etc. are amongst such venues. Within this one-side pederastic relationship are linguistic issues. Idiomatically, men involved with same-sex partners are pejoratively referred to as faggots, bugger in colonial Persian, in Farsi, kuni, an epithet insulting term riddled with derogation. The recipient, either male or female, is referred to as faggot, a definitive etymology depiction reinforcing the word's negative connotations and by implication ascribing negative connotations of homosexuality. Muhammad, 62, respondent from Tehran. No, I don't like it. I have 1 or 2 sex toys at home. The fellow I was hanging out with gave me 2 and told me to take them home. I told him I don't want it. He said take it and I will use it when I come over. I don't like it much. Doing it with a piece of plastic gives you no pleasure. A 25-year-old gay from Isfahan shared, I am homosexual. I'm an emotional person. I have made friends with the person who was looking sincere and nice. I became intimate with him. After some time, he asked me to go to his house along with him. He showed extreme warm feelings and intimacy and said that we are a real and perfect match. It overwhelmed me deep down. Eventually, I went there and found that there were 2 or 3 people more. They hit me severely, tied my hands and feet, and did whatever they wanted. Now I'm bleeding, ruined, my mind is ruined. Lesbian, 32 years old, Tehran. I was a university student when I got to know the girl with who I have been going out for 7 or 8 years. It was mere accident. I didn't know if it is right or wrong. I just got rid of my mental struggles and suicide thoughts. I once attempted suicide and I was almost dead. They brought me back to life. I wanted to kill myself because nobody could understand me. For instance, my sisters told me that we are married and our husbands may abandon us if they know about you. Our dignity is at risk. People start talking, and so I attempted suicide. The promotion of such linguistic terminology in a sexual role framework causes society to interpret men with the masculine roles more respectfully. The prevalence of such gender-biased language and how it affects society's understanding and acceptance of male and female stereotypes places men who are the doers at a more respectable position. They are the ones who have both authority and control over the sexual relationship to set the rules and conditions. These men have the power of penetration. Conversely, the feminine partner is seen as having an inferior, worthless personality, and thus his or her sexual role is referred to with swear words or pejorative language. 1.11 Marriage and Adoption. As repeatedly voiced by the interviewees, another chronic issue for Iranian homosexuals and bisexuals is the lack of legal recognition of their union. For LGB individuals, this potentially translates into a lack of access to health plan benefits, state tax benefits, protection from discrimination, or other legal rights that married spouses enjoy. They struggle with the absolute inability to be married required to make their relationship official. Iran is not a same-sex marriage-friendly jurisdiction. Evidently, when there is no chance for official relationships, the relationships are unofficial and many times superficial and trivial, which in turn leads to increased emotional harm amongst homosexuals. Under the rules and regulations of the Iranian State Welfare Organization, currently all those who are mentally, physically and financially capable are eligible for adopting child. Young and single are included in this law. However, as Iranian sexual minorities have no chance to marry someone from the same sex, they are automatically deprived of this social right to marriage, mirroring the identical way their sexual orientation does not allow them to be deemed as eligible for adoption. (1.12) Lack of sex education and health issues. Multiple sex partners or relationships can lead to health problems. What we observed is that amongst the interviewees, health issues were of a lesser concern for many of them. Based on the comments by the participants, attention to health issues was limited to condom use and/or contraceptive pills. Sometimes people would go to health centers for health checkups and blood tests, but these were not reported in large numbers. There is a need for culturally competent medical care and prevention services that are specific to this population, but in Iran, homophobia continues to be a major barrier. LGB people face specific challenges and barriers, including violence, human rights violations, stigma and discrimination. Stigmatization can lead to varying types of chronic health issues. Criminalization of same-sex relationships, cross-dressing, sodomy, and gender impersonation feeds into social homophobia, everyday instances of discrimination, and both factors prevent LGB people from accessing vital HPV prevention, testing, and treatment. As a result, some LGB people are unknowingly living with HIV or being diagnosed late with HIV is harder to treat. The fear of AIDS amongst gays is high. Most of them reported that the largest number of people diagnosed with AIDS is amongst gays. There is a need for alarm. On World AIDS Day, December 1, 2017, Iran's Health Minister Hassan Hashmi announced that Iran is facing dramatic increase in HIV diagnosis. Speaking at an AIDS awareness conference at the Ministry of Health, Hashmi noted that over the past 11 years, AIDS cases have increased ninefold. He further warned that the lack of sexual education and persistent social taboos surrounding sexually transmitted disease (STDs) in Iranian society were factors in this alarming trend. The situation of HIV in Iran poses a challenging paradox which speaks to the interwoven social and geopolitical influences that govern health. New HIV infections are increasingly being caused by unsafe sexual practices as opposed historically to injecting drug use. But the cultural taboos surrounding the discussion of sex continue to mask a silent catastrophe. Anal sex, oral sex, and inattention to health considerations increase the risk of this disease. Despite the chronic fear of AIDS, Generally speaking, the rate of sexual health awareness and relevant considerations was quite low amongst the sexual minorities. For example, although sexually active gay, bisexual and other men who have sex with men should be tested regularly for STDs. However, whether out of feigned embarrassment or the very real fear of being reported to authorities, our research study revealed that many of the male homosexuals have not had regular checkups or tests for STD. Conversely, lesbians were completely unaware of the very existence of female condoms. It was also revealed during the research survey that use of sex toys is rampant amongst some homosexuals and bisexuals. This is another cause of sexually transmitted infections, STIs. Whether or not LGBTs use sex toys with more frequency than heterosexuals is a matter of debate. Amongst lesbian women, the use of sex toys, including vibrators and dildos, is common. Differences in sexual behavior may account for some of these disparities. These toys, which are mostly bought illegally from the black market, not a trusted source, are usually not sterilized. Sex toys can pass on STI, and infections pass on through the blood. Bloodborne infections. Most gynecological and health concerns for lesbians are no different from those of heterosexual women. However, there are some unique factors. First, the sexual behaviors of lesbians include all of those available to the heterosexual women except for penile vaginal intercourse. This is most urgent regarding HIV transmission risk. Second, if she wants to become a parent, she will have a more difficult time assessing the usual options for achieving that goal. Third, apart from the gynecological issues, border areas of issues are chronic illness and/or mental health issues which do affect physical health, etc. Finally, lesbians live in a unique psychosocial economic milieu. It is plausible that each new clinician from whom she seeks care will be indifferent or hostile simply because of her sexuality. Her access to healthcare and insurance may be limited if partners' benefits are not available. Sources of healthcare may present their services in a way that is not welcoming or effective for lesbians. And lesbians may view the stages of productive life differently from heterosexual women, which may affect the preventive choices they make. For lesbians, the most frequent activities appear to be mutual masturbation and oral vaginal sex. There is an increased risk of bacterial vaginitis in women who have sex with women who have a history of sharing sex toys or whose partners have bacterial vaginitis. Skin-to-skin and mouth-on-genital contact, as well as sharing sex toys and exchanging vaginal fluid or menstrual blood through manual stimulation, leaves lesbians and bisexual women vulnerable to STD infections. Bisexual women have a higher risk of contracting HIV than women who have sex with women exclusively, because they also have sex with men whose semen contains protein that serves as an extremely efficient carrier of the virus. Sexual health education, SHE, has been recognized by international organizations as a human rights, a necessity for development, and a promoter of equity. In Iran, SHE for unmarried people is socially frowned upon because of the country's religious and cultural prohibitions of premarital sex and community-shared stigmatization of sexuality. Sex education can provide the correct information and dispel myths and misinformations. Young people may be already introduced to the topic via social platforms. Much of the information they see may be potentially erroneous. Although sex education taught in school can provide a healthy and realistic view of sex, unfortunately, the Islamic Republic of Iran's national curriculum does not offer or allow lessons in sex education. Such misguides are persuasive demonstrations how the lack of sex education leads to developing poor understanding or complete absence of understanding of sexual issues. This also demonstrates how this ignorance can lead to serious health problems not only for individuals but society at large. The sexual minorities are deprived of any education on basic sexual health issues, and what little they know has been through sporadic studies or through their own research and discussions. State welfare organization is of prime importance to the welfare and well-being anywhere in the world where sexual minorities are registered in compliance with certain statistics such as birth, death, marriage, etc. Thus, these already available and already in place demographic statistics can easily be used by Iranian government or NGOs in assisting homosexuals and bisexuals, facilitating accessible knowledge or other required aids. As LGB in Iran are vilified, denied, and rejected in various aspects of their lives, they have no presence in demographic statistics and thus they are not included in any welfare laws or policies. The skyrocketing figures on STDs and the unsuitable living circumstances of sexual minorities could be ameliorated if there is support by the state welfare organization for these groups. Giving legitimacy to the minorities and noticing their particular enigma is the first step in any endeavors to improve their situation. .13 Strategic reactions. In response to the experienced suppression and limitations, sexual minorities have not been always passive and submissive and at times have shown some intentional or unintentional, organized or unorganized reactions. The majority of sexual minorities prefer to mask their sexual orientation as their family, religion, legislation, and security forces are considered as anemic and virtually non-existent shaky sources of support. Concealment is the first strategic coping mechanism used by sexual minorities to resist the pressure. The results of the interviews with some homosexuals and bisexuals revealed that all were in agreement on concealment and collectively utilized this strategy. 1.14 Sham marriages. Iran is a country where rules are fluid, where people of all classes and degrees of religion pride themselves on finding loopholes in the Islamic system. Sham marriages being one of the oldest and biggest. LGB are forced to find innovative ways to be with the one they love. This is the sad reality, with millions of gay men and women in the world opting to take part in fake marriages as a way of appeasing family members and their wider communities. Sham marriages between two homosexuals who are trying to eliminate the familial pressures and highly possible collateral damage to the family reputation. It is seen as the best means to keep all parties happy and to elude any suspicion of homosexuality. The biggest driving force underlying sham marriage was to appease their parents. Many people are scared of being disowned by their families if they come out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Undoubtedly, this creates a tense situation, a sham life which can be destroyed instantly. Those homosexuals who are active on social platforms or other social media or are in contact with a network of friends collectively face the daily cascading wave of family pressure to marry. There are two individuals operating within the pressure to be married. Firstly, many cave into family pressure to marrying a homosexual person from the opposite sex, normally do so at a time they're in a clandestine relationship with the same-sex person. As previously reported, these marriages form its very grim, ominous beginnings where emotionally dead-end relationships void of sentiment. Secondly, they agree to the marriage so that in a win-win situation, they can eliminate the powerful family pressure and still covertly continue their relationship with the desired person. The family is content because their child is married, while the sham union allows the couple to be with their preferred sex outside the marriage. The success of such solutions requires further research. Another type of marriage is when the individual marries a heterosexual rather than a homosexual individual with the same objectives in mind, that is to say, release from the family and community pressures. Under such conditions, this is a quick fix for a person who has not come to terms with his or her sexual orientation and or is struggling to come out. This marriage temporarily solves the dilemma of trying to sort them out whilst the individual enjoys the financial, emotional, and psychological support of their heterosexual partner. This was revealed through the interviews with the participants who, although married, maintained their relationships with their homosexual partners. Living a double life and wearing a mask of heterosexuality results in a yet another bleak concealment attempt in their lives. The third solution which came to light through the fieldwork was the participants' interest in leaving the country and immigrating in the hopes that they could live more openly in a non-repressive, humane society as a LGB individual, whilst having access to their basic human rights without the fear of persecution. They have already initiated the immigration application process of claiming asylum. Some of them had tried to immigrate at a younger age and were preparing for this process, taking it in a stride as if it were a normal part of their life routine. This is not as easy as it appears to be, particularly in the US. Asylum is an immigration benefit that allows certain foreign nationals who fear persecution to remain lawfully in the US indefinitely. People who are granted asylum may apply for lawful permanent residence, a green card, 1 year after being granted asylum. With some exceptions, an asylum application generally must be filled within 1 year of the applicant's last entry into the US. Asylum claims based on persecution related to LGBT sexual orientation are particularly difficult to file, argue, and win, even with substantial evidence of persecution and ill treatment. LGBT asylum trends in the United States are closely linked within the domestic political, social, and legal climates surrounding gays and lesbians. This situation, combined with difficulties in proving LGBT identity, makes sexual orientation asylum claims especially challenging. The challenge is particularly acute with the current American administration, bolstered by a list of strict immigration policies that include a scaling back of legal pathways to citizenship. In a speech, it was stated that the immigration system is rife with fraud and abuse, which paves the way for millions of immigrants to enter the country illegally, and that dirty immigration lawyers are coaching their clients to make fake claims to trigger credible fear proceedings so that they can stay in the United States. Ali, comment in a forum, educational migration. If you want to leave the country through asylum seeking and homosexuality, be careful. At the interview, they may send you a man and ask you to have sex with him to prove you are gay. Usually the officers are well-built Africans. The Islamic penal codes and laws within the anti-homosexual tent society, as well as the obligatory military service, have compelled LGBs to exile to another country where they are more relaxed and supportive social laws, rules, and wider public acceptance. Amongst the countries that are attractive include neighboring countries such as Georgia and Turkey. Those who are in a better financial situation prefer the US, Germany, or Canada. Overall, the unattainable and unfathomable living conditions in Iran and the masked lives, suppressions and hatred has caused many of the participants want to leave Iran and go no matter where. As previously mentioned, see Chapter 4, homosexuality reports in Iran are based on antecedents of a well-founded fear of persecution and oppression. These LGBT individuals who do manage to obtain the difficult asylum status are now in a safer jurisdiction and no longer living in Iran. For the lucky ones who are able to do so, there are countless others who do not have the opportunity or financial means to leave, they remain behind. Another type of a strategic reaction by social minorities to the social pressures is engagement in heightened social activity. This reaction has been adopted by those who strongly believe in their sexual orientation and who come from more supportive and open families who, although are not in absolute acceptance, are not that harsh and suppressive. These people can no longer conceal their identity. This group consists of mostly of young university students who began an independent movement through which they tried to introduce to the public the very nature of sexual minorities' lives. In Telegram groups, they called the movement normalization, which consists of a series of activities such as dialogue with people, classmates, neighbors and relatives to bring about attitude change, no matter how small. They arrange for calls, presentations at universities, not the university where they study, talks with one another's family, and dialogue with those hurling abuses on the streets promoting the hashtag consensual normalization. The strategy of the normalization movement by LGB individuals is defined to themselves against society's perceived lenses of abnormality through a process of normalization. LGB individuals wish to show they exist within socially and politically respectable parameters through a consideration of the everyday lives of same-sex couples. This normalization will continue to reverberate as gays and lesbians push for more rights. The objective is to transform the society even if it is just one person. Another strategic reaction, but in the same vein as in heightened social activity, is the formation of parallel communities to counterbalance the homophobia and societal conformist pressures existing in Iranian society. Fed up with social negative judgment and rejection, in these communities, the members have more empathy with one another as their constituencies share unique and potentially life-threatening concerns. Active within their own microculture, LGB individuals can live in a small invisible community where there is someone who is a mother-like figure for a group of friends or having someone as an aunt. Parallel communities offer a diverse range of social networking opportunities aimed at compensating for the shortcomings and rejections many LGB individuals have suffered in their family and social lives. In these circles, people feel a sense of social belonging, an increased awareness of their civic and legal rights, and increased self-confidence to improve and maintain their health and well-being. Through these small communities, they make connections and find support systems. Often these grassroots parallel communities in Iran operate underground. Their safe spaces are tenuous. It is worth noting that these communities can be virtual or real and both have their own arrangement. There is also a wide range of social networking opportunities online, albeit with caution. Lastly, another strategic action for those who have the financial means or opportunity is to leave their hometown, unlike asylum seekers who leave their country. LGB individuals usually leave their hometown for either educational or job opportunities or for a sense of increased freedom in big cities such as Tehran. Others choose to live in another city out of fear of their families discovering their sexual orientation. To manage the skyrocketing costs of an independent life with no external support, they sometimes move in together to manage living expenses and vicariously to find emotional support. The problem of such cohabitation lies in the fact that the individual opts for such a lifestyle not as a choice or as a preference, but as the only way out of the situation. If the individual does not have the opportune moment or the financial means, economically, he or she must reside in a place where the fragile and covered sexual identity lays in the shadows, whilst their non-existent rights are violated by an available source of violence. The number of homosexuals in Iran. This graph shows the population of LGB in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. On this basis, Tehran with 4,274 homosexuals has the biggest number, followed by Mashhad 2,466 and Isfahan 2,171. It is worth considering that homosexuality does not emerge in a vacuum, and no doubt it entails consequences for the society. At times, these consequences are not at all favored by certain bodies such as the state, religion, or the educational entities. The emerging landscape of LGB recognition demands a change in attitude and law. By virtue of Iran's penal codes that further strengthens its societal hostile attitude towards homosexuality, as its laws continue to denigrate LGB, this in itself leads to dire consequences. The silence and lack of their recognition that thrives in perpetuity against these vulnerable people is deplorable and tragic. The interviewees. A total of 136 homosexuals were interviewed in 3 phenomenal cities in Iran. Each city has its own ambience and significance. The findings show that LGB are in abundance in these 3 selected cities as they have come out, as much as one can openly come out in Iran within certain like-minded circles and talk openly about their sexual orientation. Two. Quantitative results of the research study. As previously reiterated, Given LGB's insulated hidden lives and understandable angst of coming out, this research study cannot claim unequivocally that this sample is representative of the general population of LGB individuals. Nevertheless, some things do stand out. This research has utilized field techniques and targeted interviews to get an estimate of the numbers of homosexuals in Iran with a focus on three major cities of Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. The results are presented below. A very noticeable number of more than 4,000 prevails in Tehran alone, which may, as previously discussed, be partially due to the perception that Tehran is a bit more liberal when it comes to have a space for their particular orientation. In comparison, the numbers are half in Mashhad and Isfahan. It is pertinent to mention that these numbers depict those who have come out whose sexual orientation somehow is already known within their community. Undoubtedly, there are countless more that prefer to remain hidden. In Iran, the three forces that dictate one's behavior, law, religion, and popular culture, are opposed to homosexuality. They operate singularly, collectively, and simultaneously. Thus, homosexuals in Iran cannot come out as freely as LGBT do in other countries. Nevertheless, there are threads that indicate traces of homosexuality acceptance. That particular lifestyle is cautiously thriving more than ever before. This issue has been unknown to the Iranian society up until recently, and no detailed study has been conducted on the matter. This is because the authorities do not see it as a societal phenomenon or even a social issue, and therefore, there is a lack of data on the prevalence of this issue. A closer look to their marital status shows that all of them are single because they apparently are not interested in getting married and having families. As most are young adults falling within the age bracket of 20 to 31, these numbers decrease as they approach and get beyond the age of 31. Similarly, the educational level of the LGB people in Iran indicates that people with higher education have very limited tendencies, while the ratio is quite high in diploma holders, particularly in Isfahan, where the percentage has reached to 40%. It also shows, regardless of education, LGB orientation cuts across all echelons. This study also analyzed the socioeconomic status of LGB people in Iran. Socioeconomic status encompasses not just income but also educational attainment, financial security, and subjective perceptions of social status and social class. The findings show LGB tendencies in middle and high income and class families, while the lower class was active only in Isfahan. Nearly 100% say they accepted their orientation during puberty, whilst family acceptance is very low in respective cities. Most of the LGB people in Iran follow certain principles in their relationships, which is quite high in Isfahan, followed by Mashhad and Tehran. However, there are people who also have stable relationships and also multiple relationships. In Mashhad, the ratio of stable relationships and multiple relationships is moderately favorable at 50% in both categories. The research duly noticed and mentioned the signs of depression and suicide amongst LGB people attributed to its challenges and psychological issues. Lesbians also were significantly more likely to experience psychological distress than female heterosexuals. The percentage is high in Mashhad, which is 50%, moderate in Isfahan, 40%, and a bit low in Tehran, 35%. The results are presented below. 2.1 Sexual orientation. Graph number 1. Prevalence of sexual orientations in the sample population. Graph number 1 indicates the prevalence of lesbians, gays, and bisexuals in the sample populations in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. In Tehran, the prevalence rates are lesbians 35%, gays 37.5%, and bisexuals 22.5%. The figures for Mashhad are lesbians 22.7%, gays 45.5%, and bisexuals 31.9%. And in Isfahan, the figures include lesbians 20%, gays 55%, and bisexuals 25%. The graph shows that in all three cities, gays significantly outnumber lesbians and bisexuals. The 35% ratio of lesbians in Tehran is an indication of the tepid level of liberal openness in comparison to Mashhad and Isfahan. 2.2. Marital status. Graph number 2 depicts the marital status of the target population in the three cities of Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad. 100% of the sample population is single. For a confluence of reasons, homosexual men and women may enter into a relationship with someone from the opposite sex. One predominant reason is the formation of a family in the traditional sense. Based on the above graph, the sample population has had no reason to enter into a marriage and family life in a traditional, legal, and religious sense. Nevertheless, despite bowing to society and family demands, any marriage of this nature collapses due to the identity and sexual pressures on the homosexual partner. Only a low percentage of these marriages last. 2.2. Age. Graph number 3 shows the age ranges of homosexuals in Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad. Based on the graph, in Tehran, 30% of homosexuals are under 20. 60% are between the age of 20 to 31 and 10% are above 31. In Mashhad, 27.4% of them are under 20, 54.5% belonging to 21 to 30 age bracket, and 18.1% are older than 31. In Isfahan, the ratios are 30%, 50%, and 3% respectively. The findings unequivocally indicate that the homosexuals in this sample population are mostly found in the age group of 20 to 31. A clear decline can be seen in the 30s group. 2.4. Education level. Graph number 4. Percentage of educational level in the sample population. Graph number 4 indicates the acquired educational status of homosexuals in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. In Tehran, 12.5% of homosexuals do not have a high school diploma, 7.5% have attained a college degree, 30% are graduates, and 7.5% are postgraduates. In Mashhad, the figures are 36.5%, 9%, 36.5%, and 18% respectively. Whilst in Isfahan, 45% have not attained a high school diploma, 40% have a diploma, and 15% have higher education. Based on the subcultural theories, in terms of functionalism, a mismatch can be observed between the lower strata of the society with a lower educational level. But based on this graph, it can be said that a person's sexual orientation seemingly does depend on his or her acquired educational status. Homosexuality can be found in uneducated, less educated, as well as in individuals with higher educational qualifications. The graph depicts that mostly high school diploma and university BA holders have also homosexual tendencies, especially in Isfahan. 2.5. Economic and social base. Graph number 5. Percentage of socioeconomic status in the sample population. Graph number 5 concerns the socioeconomic status of homosexuals in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. In Tehran, about 80% of the homosexuals are amongst the middle class and 20% are affluent. In Mashhad, 50% of them belong to the middle class and 50% are as well-to-do. Whilst in Isfahan, 20% of the homosexuals are in the lowest socioeconomic stratum, 55% are middle class, and 25% are amongst the higher socioeconomic groups. In his book, Delinquent Boys, 1955, Cohen reasons that boys from an economically weak socioeconomic base are dissatisfied and disappointed. Aligning with those from the same economic background, they often form groups that promote a subculture which contradicts the norms of the middle and upper classes. Their behavior is often the antithesis of what society deems as acceptable behavior. But unlike what Cohen states, the study's results show that the sexual conduct which is not in line with the general public's behavior is seen within the middle and upper classes. Here is one of the translated messages of Telegram LGBT groups. I really need money. If you are looking for variety and don't mind the look, come and FUCK me from the back. I don't provide a pic. Charge 50 tomans a night. If you bring me women's clothes, I would wear them. I would even come over to Tehran. Reported, reported, and reported. PV, Nima, 24, Mazandaran, Amal. I also come over to Tehran. 2.6 Attitude of the community. Graph number 6. Percentage of childhood rape in the sample population. Graph number 6 indicates the rate of childhood rape amongst the sample populations. Essentially, we wanted to ascertain the impact of childhood abuse, particularly childhood rape, and whether or not this could lead to homosexuality or if this could be a primordial contributing factor for a homosexual orientation. Based on the graph, 7.5% of the homosexuals in Tehran and 16.6% of them in Mashhad have been raped as a child. The studies that focus on the role of family and the childhood environment try to portray homosexuality as a phenomenon linked to emotions, growth, and development process. Based on the general strain theory of Robert Agnew, individuals who are under pressure and stress behave in a way that is not acceptable to the society's laws and norms. Agnew says that negative relationships lead to negative emotions in the individual and then lead to misbehavior and deviation. Negative relationships include relationships which take away sacrosanct values such as innocence and chastity from the individual or imposes something traumatic on him or her such as rape. The experience of negative phenomena such as rape during childhood is one of the reasons that lead the person to social divergence, homosexuality, and rape as means to express one's anger. Thus, whether or not childhood rape can be a psychological factor which can lead to homosexual tendencies in adolescence needs further exploration, but the results of this research study indicate it may be a factor. 2.7 Moral aspect of homosexuality. Graph number 7. Percentage of interviewees' attitude toward the moral aspect of homosexuality. Graph number 7 indicates the sample population's attitude toward the moral aspect of homosexuality. 82.8% in Tehran, 66% in Mashhad, and 71.5% of the population believe that homosexuality is a natural and normal phenomenon. In the pre-modern legal and moral system, the sexual act is often valued merely as a tool of reproduction as its most important function. Any sexual act which did not lead to reproduction was considered immoral. For example, masturbation, anal sex with women, use of contraceptives, as well as sex with people of the same sex were immoral and religiously sinful. Therefore, a higher reproduction rate was a necessity for the survival of the population, defense of society, and economic prosperity of tribes. This necessity was reflected in the value system of the society in the form of sanctioning and reprimanding any sexual act which did not lead to reproduction. In contrast, the modern era is the era of the human population explosion. The average life expectancy has increased and the role of humans' physical power in the military and economic affairs has decreased dramatically. The fertility rate is also far beyond the mortality rate. Thus, today reproduction is not considered a virtue and the final goal of sex has changed from reproduction to pleasure-seeking or intimacy. This development manifests itself in the value system of the modern world, where there is nothing wrong with the sexual acts which do not seek reproduction. At least this approach is now subject to doubt. Thus, homosexuality is now considered natural in many terms. This moral attitude has been raised by modern philosophers, whilst genetic factors, health consequences, and malfunctions of the homosexuality have not been noted. However, this novel attitude has been greatly welcomed by homosexuals who state that romantic love and pleasure are the absolute essence of a relationship in today's modern era. In recent years, the approaches toward homosexuality have softened in Western countries, and a positive image of homosexuality have been further promoted in the press, social platforms, and the media. 2.8 Identity and Acceptance. Graph number 8. Percentage of awareness and acceptance of homosexuality by the individual and his or her family. LGBT individuals' self-realization of their sexual orientation and or gender identity is a staggering challenge to themselves as well as to the Iranian society. Graph number 7 shows the percentage of homosexuals that realized their sexual orientation during puberty and accepted it as their sexual identity. It also shows how families knew and accepted homosexuality in the three cities of Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. In Tehran, 78.6%, whilst in Mashhad, 66.6%, and in Isfahan, 100% of the respondents reported that they were aware of their sexual orientation during the puberty phase of their development. In terms of accepting their own sexual orientation, 92.8% of the respondents in Tehran, 100% of them in Mashhad and Isfahan mentioned that they have accepted homosexuality as their sexual orientation. Based on the above graph, in Tehran 42.9%, in Mashhad 50%, and in Isfahan 40% of the respondents said that their families know about their sexual orientation, and 14.28% of the families in Tehran and 16.6% in Isfahan have accepted their children's sexual identity. Communicating with parents was reported as problematic by the majority of participants. As can be seen in the graph, between 40% to 50% have reported informing their parents about their sexual orientation. Nevertheless, the ratio of acceptance is relatively low and falls between 14 to 16% in Tehran and Mashhad, whilst in Isfahan, the respondents reported a dismal zero acceptance against the 40% of confessions to parents. Most families in Iran are socially conservative and adhere to an ironclad firm belief in societal acceptance. Even if they are aware of their child's orientation, they always restrict them from sharing that part of their identity with other family members and people in their communities. 2.9 Social networking. Graph number 9. Role of cyberspace in friendships and relationships with other homosexuals. Hammock's 2005 framework of LGB identity development suggests that cultural factors such as the media may influence important psychological domains, including individual self-perceptions. Graph 9 shows the prevalence of homosexuals who became familiar with each other through interacting on social media. Based on the above table, 64.3% of people in Tehran and 60% of them in Isfahan realized their sexual identity through social networks while chatting on different versions of cyberspaces. Meanwhile, 71.4% of the sample population in Tehran, 33.3% in Mashhad, and 100% in Isfahan became friends with people of a similar sexual orientation through social media. 35.7% of homosexuals in Tehran, 83.3% in Mashhad, and 60% of them in Isfahan have assessed these friendships as satisfactory. As witnessed in the graph, social networks play a key role in social upbringing and stronger relationships amongst homosexuals in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. From a psychological and social point of view, the most important means for homosexual support is the social environment, such as social networks and homosexual friends. Social networks facilitate and accelerate links between homosexuals. Edwin Sutherland, in the theory of differential association, opines most abnormal behaviors are learnt in early groups, especially groups of friends. At this level of social interaction, Sutherland claimed that the same way people learn to follow laws, they learn to be abnormal. People learn abnormal behavior via the communication process and through interaction with others. Based on Sutherland's view, the group and friendly relationships which are established amongst homosexuals through the social networks and arising can be learnt. People enter homosexual groups, learn about homosexual identity and internalize it. 2.10 Relationships. Graph number 10. Percentage of different kinds of homosexual relationships in the sample population. Graph number 10 shows the prevalence of multiple, lasting, and clear relationship amongst LGB in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. Based on the graph, 14.3% of homosexuals in Tehran, 50% in Mashhad, and 40% in Isfahan have had multiple unclear sexual relationships. However, 42.85% of them in Tehran, 50% in Mashhad, and 40% in Isfahan have stable relationships. Moreover, 50% of homosexuals in Tehran, 66.6% in Mashhad, and 80% in Isfahan follow certain principles in their relationships. Palmer distinguishes 4 types of homosexuality in the modern Western culture. Casual homosexuality is a passing homosexual encounter that does not substantially structure a person's sex life, such as a schoolboy's crushes. Another type is situated activities, which refers to circumstances in which homosexual acts are regularly carried out but do not become an individual's overriding preference. In places such as the military camps or prisons where men live without women, such behaviors are rampant. Personalized homosexuality refers to individuals who have a preference for homosexual activities but who are isolated from groups in which this is easily accepted. Homosexuality here is a furtive activity, hidden away from friends and colleagues. Homosexuality as a way of life refers to individuals who have come out and have made associations with others of similar sexual taste as a key part of their life. When we view Graph 10 within the framework of Plummer's 4 types of homosexuality, we realize that most of homosexuals in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan fall under the category of personalized homosexuality and homosexuality as a way of life. Here is one of the translated messages of LGBT Telegram groups. I am 24 from Tabriz. I want a body, not a brother, younger than me. I am the only child and not into sex and loose behaviors. I own one of the swimming pools in Tabriz. After we know each other, I would say bro, PV only. Tabriz, 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 Tabriz. Hi, I am Ami, 28 from Qom. I am top or an inserter. I am big. My look is manly. I am hairy. No place. If there is an inserter from Qom and around who is fine with my conditions, with a photo and 2.11 Violence and discrimination. Graph number 11. Percentage of violence and discrimination against homosexuals. Graph number 11 shows the percentage of violence, discrimination, and humiliation inflicted on homosexuals in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. Based on the graph, most violence and discrimination is seen in Isfahan, 80%, followed by Mashhad and Tehran, 66.6% and 7.1% respectively. Compared to Tehran, Mashhad and Isfahan are more traditional and religious and thus consider homosexuality as an abnormality and deviation. It is unsurprising that these 2 cities have high rates of violence against homosexuals. The opponents of homosexuality see it as moral corruption or something unnatural. Homophobia and stigmatization of homosexuality in these societies are the major causes behind violence and discrimination. In Iranian society, homosexuality is punishable under the law by state-ordered executions and flogging. From a religious perspective, it is seen as an unacceptable and abnormal conduct. Since homosexuality is considered a flagrant social mismatch and is stigmatized, there are many who believe that homosexuals deserve the violence and discrimination. In general, the public perceives homosexuals as perverts who threaten the moral health of the society. Aggressive attacks on homosexuals and murders are still rampant. Many homosexuals try to have anti-homosexual attempts categorized as hate crimes based on the law. 2.12 Religious beliefs. Graph number 12. Percentage of religious beliefs in the sample population. Graph number 12 shows the prevalence of religious beliefs amongst this population in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. Based on the graph, 14.28% of homosexuals in Tehran, 33.3% in Mashhad, and 20% in Isfahan believe in religious concepts such as God and in religious rituals such as prayer and fasting. This data indicates that the homosexuals in Mashhad have stronger religious beliefs, as religious upbringings and socialization is more prevalent in this city. Isfahan and Tehran are more modern with less traditional and religious beliefs. 2.13 Depression and suicide. Graph number 13. Percentage of suicide and depression in the sample population. Graph number 13 shows suicide and depression amongst homosexuals in Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. Tehran with 35.7%, Isfahan with 40%, and Mashhad with 50% of suicide case. The figures tell us that due to the prevalence of traditional values and pressures in Mashhad, and thus a higher rate of violence and discrimination, there are more cases of suicide amongst homosexuals in this city. 2.14 Health concerns. Graph number 14. Percentage of homosexuals observing sexual health considerations in the sample population. Graph number 14 shows the percentage of homosexuals who observe safe sex practices in their sexual contacts. In Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan, many do not take extra measures to protect themselves from related health hazards. In Mashhad, 83.3%, in Tehran 70.4%, and in Isfahan 60% of homosexuals observe health issues. The ratio in sample population in 3 cities is above 50%, which displays a great deal of ignorance amongst gays, lesbians, and bisexuals on this subject matter.